Hello everyone! Today we're doing the USC predicted record in their inaugural Big Ten season. You know, USC was quite an interesting team last year just due to how bad their defense was paired with their really good offense that they had, a returning Heisman quarterback and a lot of good skill players. But that does seem to have been Lincoln Riley's MO for most of his head coaching career. And it's kind of interesting how similar the situations were between the first team on USC's schedule and USC. Obviously, Lincoln Riley fired Alex Grinch way too late. He kept him around way too long after we had seen that he had a track record for this. But if USC doesn't make improvements on defense in the next few years at least, I think we have to have a discussion about whether this is really due to the coordinators he's hired, whether it's due to talent, or whether it's due to the fact that Lincoln Riley himself culturally can't build a team that values defense. He said all the right things, but we will see what happens. And I don't think you're going to see a huge improvement. USC's not going to walk out of there with a top 10 defense this year. I mean, they do have talent maybe, but it's still a work in progress even with the new coordinator. And so you look at this first game versus LSU, and two teams have a very similar thing to prove about last year. That last year's defense was last year, and the offense is not going to drop off, and we can improve our defense as well. The thing is, though, I have a lot more confidence about LSU being able to do that, just because I have a lot more confidence in Brian Kelly as a coach to build a winning football team with a winning culture. It's just because, we've seen it through his career because his career has been longer. Lincoln Riley's young, and so he's still got a lot to prove about himself. But in this first game, I am giving it a likelihood of 0.5, just because we don't know really which defense is going to improve the most, which one needs to improve the most. I could actually see the under taking over in this one just from a standpoint of a lot of the offensive players are going to walk in feeling very confident. And then you see, it's the beginning of the season. We're getting punched in the mouth. We're actually getting hit, even though we've heard all offseason about how this defense is bad. Yeah, both teams are going to be saying that, and so it might be harder to score than first expected. Offense is working out, things in the first couple of weeks. It's to be expected, even if they're good offenses. So, I mentioned this in the Florida video, and I will repeat it. I think LSU, their profile just seems to be based on quarterback offensively, because they lose the Heisman winning quarterback Jaden Daniels. And, the passing element, I have no doubts that Nussmeier is going to be an efficient and a good passer. My problem is, where's the rush yards going to come from? And from a standpoint of LSU running backs for a few years now, even like in the last couple of years of Orgeron, have kind of struggled to generate production. And a lot of the running production from last year from LSU was from Jaden Daniels. LSU's top 3 running backs last year had an over 3 yard per carry drop-off from Jaden Daniels. So, Jaden Daniels was the machine last year, along with those receivers and the offensive line. So, we will see what happens, but I am giving this a 0.5 just from a standpoint of you're still figuring things out. I think neither team's season is over if they lose that game. So, we'll see what happens. I am confident in either team's ability, theoretically, to bounce back from a loss in that game. Utah State's a 1 because, if you lose that, then you're just not the kind of team we think you are. At Michigan is a very interesting game as well. Jim Harbaugh actually comes to your city, but he's in the NFL now with the Chargers. And so this coaching change, and just in general, because they had such an experienced team last year, a lot of veterans on that Michigan championship team last year, Michigan is 130th out of 134 teams in returning production. So this Michigan team has lost a lot. The new young guys they bring in might be good. We'll have to see what happens. I am giving this a 0.5 just because USC is still playing in the largest stadium in America, Michigan Stadium. It may not be the loudest, but they're going into a very hostile Big Ten environment, maybe even a more hostile environment than anything they will have seen in the Pac-12. And so from a standpoint of that, Michigan's going to be a good team. I do wonder, if Michigan loses to Texas, if they'll be mentally dejected or if they'll, bounce back. I think Sharon Moore is a very good motivator. He got the guys motivated to play last year and coached them well, but that was, in limited stints throughout the year, and Harbaugh was still around the program. So I don't know what it's going to mean when he takes over the entire program. Maybe it's like an, Urban Meyer to Ryan Day situation. So we'll see there. I think USC at Michigan is a 0.5. Very confident that Alex Orji is a very talented quarterback, and he's going to be a force to be reckoned with in the Big Ten. Wisconsin, I'm also giving a 0.5. Wisconsin doesn't have many questions to me because I think they're always going to have good defense, especially with Luke Fickell there. Does the offense improve? Wisconsin, to me, profiles as a team that's a very developmental team that knows how to do fundamentals and do them well. They're very disciplined. And so can we just get better offensive improvement? Phil Longo is the offensive coordinator in year 2, and he's got a very good quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke. The Big Ten West last year had very putrid offenses, and Wisconsin was one of them with very good teams. A lot of teams that profiled kind of like Iowa, although I think maybe Wisconsin's issues are more improvable than Iowa's, just due to Iowa's style of play. So that's a 0.5 for me because I do think that USC is maybe more talented than Wisconsin. But from a fundamental standpoint, even in Los Angeles, from a fundamental standpoint, I still have questions about Lincoln Riley being able to develop a program in that way. At Minnesota's a very questionable team. There's a lot of questions about it. 71% returning production is not bad, but there is just a lot of unknowns on this team because I don't know what to make of last year's results. I know Minnesota had a tough schedule last year, but even still, Northwestern was a program that was dead in the water, after, losing Pat Fitzgerald for a month before the season. And then the defensive coordinator takes over as the head coach and also the defensive coordinator during the season. And Minnesota still loses to them, and they go 5-7 and still make a bowl game because there weren't enough 6-6 bowl-eligible teams. But I don't know what to make of last year's result because Minnesota has been a very good team under P.J. Fleck, and it just fell off last year. And so I don't know if last year was the real Minnesota or if Minnesota is going to go back to what they were doing before. And by that I mean winning. Penn State I have as a 0.5. Now it's interesting to note I'm only giving this game a 0.5 because it's in Los Angeles. If they played this game in Happy Valley, it's a 0.25 for USC. Because I just think Penn State's a more established program and a better program right now than USC. Drew Aller probably needs to take a next step. They've taken steps to ensure that happens. We'll see if it actually does happen. They brought in the Kansas offensive coordinator, which was well needed just because of the explosivity of Kansas's offense. You needed someone from a program like that with a very good offense to bring some explosivity to the game at Penn State. Penn State had putrid offenses in the games where it really mattered, the Michigan and Ohio State games. And so if you cannot be anemic in big moments, and I think USC counts as a big moment, then Penn State's going to be a very good team, but it will be tough to win in Los Angeles, just from the standpoint of not even USC being a super tough environment, but just from the standpoint of you don't have your own environment behind you. And also, it helps to mention Julian Fleming, who would probably start pretty much anywhere except Ohio State last year. He was probably the third or fourth receiver on that team, even though he would be a lot of teams' best receivers. And so there's not a lot of excuses for Drew Aller to not perform this season, and USC is a game where they should do that, but it'll be tough. At Maryland, I'm also giving a 0.5 because I do trust Mike Loxley's scheme. Now, Maryland loses their quarterback here, so I do expect some kind of maybe growing pains early on, but I do think that Maryland is a formidable team and should not be treated as a nobody in this situation. And, I mean, I should know about Maryland because I'm an Auburn fan and how they just dismantled my team last year. But we don't have to talk about that. Rutgers, I have a .75 only because of the travel. This is going to be a big thing for a lot of Big Ten teams. I don't have any doubts about Rutgers as a football team from an identity standpoint and an understanding of they know what they're doing and they're fundamentally sound. At the same time, though, this is going to be an 11 p.m. kick for Rutgers in their time. And so it's an adjustment, but you're doing this for conference games now because people managing these conferences decide that this is what we need to do, is to have West Coast teams playing East Coast teams in conference games. Madness. At Washington is a .75. Now this should be a conference game for USC in a sensible world. Just Washington's, I'm expecting a drop-off just from the coaching change angle. It's kind of similar to Michigan. Both teams that were in the national championship last year lost their head coach, and they lost a lot of players. And Washington did bring some guys in from transfers, and I do think Jed Fish is a good coach, and he'll, have them as a good team in due time. I don't know about 2024, so I'm giving USC a .75 in that game, even in Seattle. And I know Seattle's a tough environment, but you also have to, at the end of the day, have the type of team that makes it matter against these very good offensive teams. I mean, we hadn't really talked about it much, but, Miller Moss, we saw him in the bowl game. I think they were going to pursue Will Howard until they saw how he performed and how he can actually lead this team to having a good offense, especially under Lincoln Riley, which Lincoln Riley I will never doubt, as an offensive mind. Nebraska I have as a .5 because a lot of people are expecting Nebraska to improve a lot this year, as am I. But you've also got a true freshman quarterback, even though he was the top-rated quarterback in the nation. He's still a true freshman, and so you still got to, worry about these types of things early on. I mean, we saw, everybody acknowledges now that Bo Nix was a very good quarterback, but in 2019, his true freshman season, he had really big moments, and then he had games where he just, completely dropped off in production. It doesn't mean Bo Nix was a bad quarterback. It just meant that he was a freshman, and you're going to throw picks sometimes. You're going to make bad decisions sometimes. You're going to run when maybe a guy's open and only get 5 yards instead of a first down. So, things like that are going to happen to Nebraska, even if Nebraska's a very improved team this year. So Nebraska, that's a .5 for me. At UCLA, I have as a .75. At UCLA, unlike Washington and Michigan, from a production standpoint, UCLA actually does return quite a bit of production. The coaching, that's going to be a transition. You go from an established guy like Chip Kelly to Deshaun Foster, who a lot of people said was evidence that UCLA doesn't really care much about football, because if they did, they would have done a national hire. But the players seemed really happy about the announcement when it happened, and they seemed really, to get behind Coach Foster. And I think, personally, that can be enough in your first couple of years sometimes. We saw it with, guys like Shane Beamer, Sam Pittman, maybe guys that weren't like the huge tactical minds, but from a motivational standpoint can really get behind a team and make them perform better than what their talent says they should. Even with that said, though, I think UCLA just got to bite the bullet this year and probably have a losing record. So .75, I do think USC is a bit better. And then last game, Notre Dame at home. That's a .5. I mean, USC, Notre Dame, it's a competitive series. Last year wasn't competitive, and it probably should have been more than it was. Notre Dame brings in Riley Leonard. I feel like they might just start doing this at Notre Dame, where they just bring in, a veteran guy from transfers to lead the team for a year, and then they just keep doing it, because they did it with Sam Hartman last year, and it worked to some extent. Now, some people would say that, Notre Dame needs to get past 9 or 10 games, maybe get to the playoff, and we'll see what happens there. Notre Dame, under this playoff system, this is how stupid the new playoff system is. Under this new playoff system, Notre Dame cannot be a top 4 seed, even if they're one of the top 4 in the country, because you have to have the automatic qualifiers as the top seeds, which is ridiculous in my opinion. But that's neither here nor there. Talking about the USC game for Notre Dame and talking about the Notre Dame game for USC, I think that these are both going to be very good teams. The trajectory of this game entirely, to me, depends on which team has had a disaster of a season and which one has had either an expected season or a better than expected season. And that will ultimately, when we get closer to time for this game to be played, help maybe fill in the gaps of what these teams are. But as of now, I have this as a 0.5 because I think both teams are level. USC has high highs on offense and lower lows on defense than Notre Dame. But I do not doubt Marcus Freeman at all either. So that's a 0.5. So when you add all that up, the record is 8-4, which is my prediction for the USC in 2024, which is an improvement over last year record-wise. They do that again the year after, it's probably not going to be enough for USC fans. It might not even be enough for USC fans this year. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what program you want me to do next. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a good one.